Hello and welcome to Unworthy History. Today I'm going to bring you some actual history from this book right here, A History of Rockbridge County, Virginia by Oren Frederic Morton. So last episode I did from this book, it was about the first settlement of Rockbridge County and one of the first battles between Indians. It was against the Iroquois who were passing through and Colonel McDowell's troops who attacked them. Now today we're going to pick up around the 1750s and talk about some more of the interactions between the Native American Indians and those first settlers of Rockbridge County, Virginia. The French and Indian War broke out in 1754 and continued so far as the Indians were concerned until 1760. The advance line of settlement had passed the Allegheny Divide, and the greatest havoc was in the valleys along the frontier. A local cause for the outbreak was the outrage at Anderson's barn on Middle River. The date is not exactly known, but seems to be the month of June 1753 or possibly 1754. 12 Indians were returning from a raid against the Cherokees and lodged with John Lewis near Stanton. Some men were present whose families or friends had suffered some loss at the hands of the Indians. A beef was killed and whiskey provided. The guests were induced to stay until nightfall and give one of their dances. After they left, the Indians were followed in the darkness to Anderson's barn, where all but one were murdered. For this act of treachery in a time of at least nominal peace, a heavy toll of vengeance was exacted. The colonial government sought to punish the perpetrators, but the effort was ineffectual. One of the faults of the Ulstermen was their propensity to make trouble with the Indian. The Rockbridge area was by no means safe from attack, and there were several blockhouses for the protection of the people. William Patton mentions a stockade at Alexander McClary's 1.5 miles from his home, and says there were several others in the Borden Grants. One of these must have been the Bell House, which is still standing and occupied. It is about 2 miles south of Raffine and very near a branch. Another was a log structure on Walker's Creek, used as a dwelling until a recent date. The floor was of walnut puncheons. The roof, which was too steep to scale, fell in during the winter of 1917 and 18. In several other instances, the Pioneer Blockhouse still exists, with widened windows and some other alterations, or the logs have been used in a building of later design. In all instances, the walls and doors were bulletproof against the weapons of that age. The windows were too narrow for a man to crawl through, and there were loopholes in the walls. The loophole was cut in the shape of the letter X so that a considerable breadth of vision might be commanded by the gun pointed through the opening. The Indian was unwilling to storm a blockhouse. The cost could be severe, and the defenders were comparatively safe from his bullets. So he endeavored to gain his end by stealth or stratagem, and when he did make an attack, it was usually by night. If he could set fire to the roof, he did so. A council of war held at Stanton on May 20th, 1756, mentions that the greatest part of the able-bodied single men of this country is now on duty on our frontiers, and there must continue until they are relieved by forces from other parts. Sitting on this council were these captains: Joseph Colton, John Moore, Joseph Lapsley, Robert Bratton, James Mitchell, and Samuel Norwood. The only conspicuous raids belonging to this period were the occurrences in the Renick settlement and the first foray into the valley of Kerr's Creek. The latter will be spoken of in connection with the second. The date of the attack on the Renick house is July 25, 1757. A party of Shawnees, said to have been 60 in number but probably much fewer, came through the Cartmill Gap to Purgatory Creek, where they killed Joseph Dennis and his child, and took prisoner his wife Hannah. They also killed Thomas Perry. Then they went to the house of Robert Renick, where they captured Mrs. Renick, her 4 sons, and a daughter. The next blow was at Thomas Smith's house, where they killed both Renick and Smith, and took away Mrs. Smith and her servant Sally Jew. George Matthews, Audley Maxwell, and William Maxwell, who then were young men, were on their way to Smith's and thought a shooting match was in progress. As soon as they saw the bodies of the 2 men, they wheeled their horses about, and the 4 bullets fired at them at the same instant did no other harm than to wound Audley Maxwell slightly and take off the club of Matthew's queue. One party of the Indians started away with the prisoners and booty, and the others went to Cedar Creek. An alarm was given, and the people of the neighborhood gathered at Paul's Stockade near the site of Springfield. The women and children were left with a guard of 6 men, while George Matthews went in pursuit with a force of 21 men. He overtook and fought the enemy, but the night was wet and dark, and the foe got away. Next morning, 9 dead Indians were found on the battleground and were buried. Benjamin Smith, Thomas Morey, and a Mr. Jew were killed in the battle, and they were buried in the meadow of Thomas Cross near Springfield. Mrs. Renick was released a few years later. Her daughter died in captivity, and her son Joshua became a chief of the Miamis. The other children returned with their mother. Mrs. Dennis was a woman of much resourcefulness and determination. She learned the Shawnee tongue, painted as the Indians did, and because of her skill in treating illness, she was given much liberty. She thereby found a chance to escape, crossed the Ohio River on a driftwood log, and made her way back to her frontier home. This occurred in 1763. So I'm going to go ahead and stop there for this episode. So again, this is the history of Rockbridge County, Virginia, and some of the early battles between the settlers there and the Indians. In this case, this was an attack on the Renick settlement by Shawnees. We also read about an earlier attack where Indians were massacred at Anderson's barn. So if you want to hear more episodes like this, then be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time on Unworthy History.